Welcome to the RPOA webinar. If you are new to the organization, the Recruitment Process Outsourcing Association is the leading industry association for recruitment process outsourcing foresight, innovation, and the trusted convener for the RPO community. Extremely pleased to be joined by Matt Corbett, President at ZRG Embedded Recruiting RPO and Advisory Board member returning to the webinar program. And first time on our webinar, I'm pleased to welcome Dan Harten, Customer Marketing Strategist at hireEZ. I want to start with Matt, if you want to take a minute or so to quickly introduce yourself to our audience.
Thanks, Lamise. Lovely to be here again. Lovely to chat with you, Dan. Nice to see you again. So my background, so obviously I'm a Brit, live in Boston, moved to America 35 years ago. My wife's American. Have been in the talent space my entire career. Started off in tech consulting, then went exec search, then went in-house at Google, and then started an RPO that ZRG acquired 3 years ago. So just love the talent space. Love helping people, and particularly fascinated now with AI and how AI is sort of accelerating all things labor. So that's my background.
Fantastic. And we said we're going to make this more of a fireside chat. So I'm going to turn it to Dan to introduce himself and take it off from there.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Dan Harten, and I lead the customer marketing team here at hireEZ. And you're probably like, why is a marketing guy going on a webinar talking shop about recruiting, sourcing, what's happening in the landscape? Back in my career, I spent the majority of the time being a recruiter, built teams over at Amazon and AWS, went over on the executive search side over at Facebook or Meta for a couple of years, and then transitioned to a marketing role here at hireEZ, where I do a lot of stuff like this. I talk to leaders every single day of understanding what the landscape is and how to increase the visibility of what's going on and creating, true community, and that's with conversations like this. I'm so pleased to sit down with Matt and just talk through what is applicant fraud, what are we seeing, what can your recruiting teams, RPO teams, what can you do to understand what's going on, but then also be an impact to those businesses that you guys are supporting. So getting ahead of the game and then, really understanding what you can do moving forward. So I love to kick off the conversation with you, Matt. When you first heard about applicant fraud, when was that? Are you hearing it more and more with your customers internally? Help me understand, set the stage of like what is happening right now, because I think applicant fraud, the quote unquote applicant fraud, can mean many different things, and we can kind of dive in later on what scenarios are happening right now. But I want to pause there and ask you of what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and what you're feeling right now in the current landscape.
So the first time I ever came across applicant fraud was actually in the 90s in sort of the dot-com boom. So there was a hiring burst. Companies were looking for engineers and all over the world. And I remember very clearly my first candidate that wasn't a real candidate on a particular project, all going back to sort of Power Builder, Sybase, and we're needing engineers to help build these systems. And the candidate we spoke to wasn't the person doing the work. And so it's not a new thing. It's been going on for a long, long time. But it's changed most recently. So I think right now, it used to be people had heard about it, maybe one or two people in the organization had come across it, but it really wasn't widespread. I think today it's different. Today, from my research, like 60% of hiring teams sort of suspect that AI is helping a candidate through the process at some point.
Yeah, I did some research on my own of figuring out, preparing for this, understanding this topic, and from put in perspective, Gartner projects that by 2028, 1 in 4 candidates' profiles will be fake. And resume builder surveys say that 60 70% candidates admitting to maybe lying on resumes right now. HR.com and SHRM 2025 say 30 to 40% for tech and remote role recruiters are reporting fake or candidates being bots. I'm curious in the chat, are you guys seeing that as recruiters, talent leaders? Are you seeing the same percentages that we're seeing from some of these surveys from reputable companies? I was curious. We'll give it a minute and maybe have some people throw in saying yes, no, or the other.
It does make sense that while we're waiting on that, Dan, if Gartner's like a quarter of candidates could be potentially fake by I think you said 2028, like it does make sense, right? We're already at about a third of hiring teams have experienced it themselves.
For sure.
Um, and I think that about almost 60 plus percent believe that candidates they're talking to are sort of using some sort of fake or some exaggeration or some sort of technology to change the perception of their skills, their capabilities, maybe their body of work. So it does make sense we're on that 25% trajectory to be fake.
100%. I think there's a couple of things that really it's rising. The applicant fraud is rising. A couple of things that come to mind is, rise in remote work for a couple years there. Everybody was remote, so less face-to-face interaction makes it harder to verify identity. Access to these AI tools, like you mentioned, with AI generated resumes or cover letters, and the fabrication of experience is really convincingly for whatever you put on there. I think digital manipulation of credentials, fake diplomas, it's easy access to create something on ChatGPT saying you went somewhere and there's no verifying it. What are your thoughts on what are the reasons why maybe this topic is on the rise?
So I think there's sort of four reasons. And then I think we should probably also sort of define what fake or fraud means,
For
because I
sure.
think it's a broad term, so it might mean 10 things to 10 different people. I do think you're spot on. Remote work is probably the first trigger that happened to exaggerate this. AI tools, the sheer power of I think has exaggerated this an awful lot. It's also happening more in the US because the US sort of open labor laws and the more dynamic labor market, which is always seen as sort of a superpower of the US, but it also does allow candidate fraud to be more rampant. And then also, I think that because we're in sort of a hyper accelerated technology curve, there's motivation to access corporate systems and corporate data to be able to grab information from someone else rather than having to build it yourself, even though development cycles are super fast. So these sort of four things, I think together, are creating this environment.
For sure. So, like, I have a definition of applicant fraud, what I think it is, but I'd love to kind of understand what you think it is. What I think it is, it's someone intentionally gives false or misleading information on their resume, application, during an interview. Uh, for example, experience, education, using a fake identity. Maybe that's some of the lower risks of hey fabrication on a resume. I think like the percentages show, I think everybody's doing that right now. But then, like you said, there's on a flip side of a higher risk opportunities for organizations to be at risk of. There's companies out there right now that solely are doing this to gain access of your information, and there's a risk concern for that. But how do you define applicant fraud?
So we've come across five different types.
Sure.
So I'll go from sort of not so scary to terrifying. So the not so scary for us is basically sort of AI assisted embellishment of your background. So
Sure.
basically exaggerating what you've done, which I think humans have done from the beginning of time. So that I think that's we're just using technology to do what we do. I think the second one is a little more dangerous. That's really sort of genuine identity fraud. People saying they are someone who they're simply not.
Sure.
The third one is really sort of skills fraud. This is where people are creating fake work, presenting work that they did that they never did. The fourth one is the one you sort of last mentioned, which is sort of companies who are just, this is their business model. They are presenting fake candidates, getting on payrolls, generating revenue out of fake candidates that don't exist. The last one, of course, I think there have been some recent stories about sort of state-sponsored candidate fraud, putting individuals into companies with the explicit goal of extracting data out of confidential data sets, technology, patents, etc. Sort of state-sponsored fraud. So
For
those are
sure.
the five that we've come across.
It's funny you say, hey, the first experience that you've had this was in the 90s. I'll tell you a quick little story for the audience. I grew up in Anoka, Minnesota, if people don't know, and we are quote unquote the Halloween capital of the world. So every Halloween, the kids dress up in their costumes, there's a parade, there's a haunted house, and this year I kind of realized, like I came home and I'm like, you know, we kind of created this haunted house in an internal talent acquisition industry right now where candidates are coming in. And we're not sure if they're fake or they're real or they're ghosts. We do a whole long application process. Everybody submits their CV, and then I go back and have to fill out the filters. And it's really created this haunted house for us. And a backstory about 12 years ago, during this time, I was working on a role for an SAP engineer, a high level, coming in, had a conversation with the candidate, phone screened it, went well. Hiring manager did the same thing. We flew the candidate in from another state to our facility. And after that interview, the in person interview, we all got in a room, looked around, and said, that wasn't the individual that we spoke to on the phone. And I still remember the feeling. It was kind of a gut punch of my stomach sank and said, what could I have done better? And why did this happen? It's been around. Now it's been just like you said, it's a little more sophisticated with the technology at the fingertips of people's hands that people need to kind of look out for. I love to hear from the chat. Like, what type of applicant frauds have you dealt with in your guys' career? Is it the typical falsified applications that we talked about, fabricating their resumes, using AI to increase their chance of being selected for an interview? Or is it the AI-enabled interviews, candidates using AI in real time during the interview, where I'm interviewing Matt, I ask him a question, he pauses, uses something on another screen to get an answer, and then he responds with the AI generated response. Curious on the group, what people are dealing with right now. Or are we to that next level of saying, hey, this person is not real, this is 100% bot. How do I understand this? Curious. Where do you see the biggest opportunity for teams right now to prepare themselves of not if it's going to happen, but when it's going to happen, Matt?
Um, I think the first question we get from a lot of clients is like, why should I care about this?
Sure.
I think that the recent statistic I read was the average candidate who is hired, who isn't the work they presented, isn't who you think they are, is costing a company, even if it's caught early, will cost a company 30, 40 grand per person.
Sure.
It adds up. So I think that's why you should care. I do think identity verification super early in the process is a huge opportunity. I do think companies are starting to change the interview process to be adaptive and get ahead of this problem. I do think having multiple people interview candidates, and then if you do feel there's an issue, giving the second or third interviewer a heads up, sort of escalating your gut feeling. And so another person can verify whether this candidate is an issue or not. And then much more sophisticated skills assessment technologies coming on board, which is, you're using technology to solve a technology problem. So I think that there actually is a great amount of work being done on this by a lot of very, very brilliant people to get ahead of this problem. Probably going back to the statistic you said at the beginning from Gardner, like the idea of 25% of candidates being fake by 2028, that's just a terrifying statistic. And so any hiring company sort of has to get ahead of this.
when I look at kind of the recruiter's role in this, like you mentioned, I think the biggest takeaway is if you see something, say something and document it. Obviously, that's not saying it to the candidate on the other line in real time. But if you have kind of those spidey senses, we're all in this TA industry for a reason. And part of that is we all have that spidey sense. We talk to candidates every single day. But if something is off, don't accuse. You're not an investigator, but you are the one that has that spidey sense and make sure that if you see something, you say something and you document it and you bubble it up. Obviously, every organization is going to have some sort of a process, and if you aren't having that same this process already intact right now, I would encourage you from your internal teams to start talking about this. Of hey, do we have an applicant fraud committee that we can look at some of this stuff? Bring other resources in, not just your recruiting teams, talk legal or and the technology organization within your groups. What can be done to build a committee to kind of filter out some of these things? What's your thoughts on that, Matt?
I mean, I think what's wonderful about this problem is there are some very basic things you can do to catch it. Like
Yeah,
it's not that complex an issue to solve, right? So for example, if you're doing a video interview, camera on, like no exceptions.
for sure.
Looking out for delays in the question and the answer. And if those delays are consistent through the total interview, like it's okay if a candidate has to think about one or two questions, but if they have to pause for a LLM or a Google search on every single question, it's a huge red flag. And then I think the third thing is you shouldn't ask questions that are simple yes or no answers and then go to a second question, which is yes or no answers. Like ask complex questions. When you get an answer, ask a follow-up question for the answer. Like go 3 or 4 or 5 levels deep into the interview question thought. You can really see if a candidate has depth and substance in a particular topic. And you really, a good recruiter, their spider sense will instantly know whether someone is searching, delaying, someone else is giving them the answers, or if they know the topic.
For sure. The one thing that came to mind, and you probably could, you know, understand this working at Google. When I was working at Amazon and Facebook, there was, technical assessments where we would send candidates for a first initial stage, making sure that their technical abilities are up to par of the standard. Um, what I might see more often as we move forward is once we get to the in-person round, hey, we're going to pull up the whiteboard and see if you can code in real time versus on the computer because it really tests their ability to can they do it or not versus utilizing some of these other systems or technology to pass a quick test. Granted, there are some things in place that, hey, if I copy and paste, it's going to flag the system. But I think candidates are a little more sophisticated than that to kind of game the system a little bit. And one way to do that is bring them in person and have them whiteboard in real time. Or if you're going to do virtual, see if they can whiteboard in real
Yeah,
time over a Zoom meeting. What is
a
your
hundred
thoughts on
percent.
that, Matt?
I mean, 100% spot on. Live coding is essential to actually get into whether someone can do it. And if someone presents a body of work, you got to break out a lot of time to dig deep into the work they're presenting as theirs. Like really understand what was the situation when you were brought into a company, what was the product requirements, what work did you do, what was the outcome. Like really dig into the work they presented. Just a candidate showing you their portfolio of work, and you just assuming that that's their work. I think that's the fault is almost on the recruiter's side at that point for just taking it at face value. Dig into what candidates are showing you as their body of work as part of standard due diligence now.
For sure. So we understand there's a problem. Some, practical takeaways that, we can keep an eye open for during these interview process. I think it also goes a step further. I know we've talked on different calls of how do we teach the teams how to look out for some of these things about, 20 years ago when I got into the industry, it's, hey, I'm going to take my resume, I'm going to take my red pen, and go line by line by line of, hey, what is a quote unquote red flag? Now it's retraining your current teams on that's the same process, same mindset of understanding what these red flags are, but it's going to be in a virtual setting. So, do you have in an organization have some check boxes or templates of saying, hey, look out for these specific things when you're interviewing an individual? Where do you see the training and the empowerment of these teams to be successful as you continuing to interview these candidates?
I mean, you don't want your recruiting team to be really cynical.
Yeah,
And you want your recruiters to still be excited about engaging with a candidate, have a great relationship with a candidate, and help them and get the satisfaction of them doing amazing work. So, I mean, let's not become deeply cynical. Let's just make sure that we're aware of the issue, aware of the repercussions of ignoring the issue, and just building in these very simple steps of due diligence, verification, like reference checks, right? I don't know why reference checks have become almost non-tested these days. I think
sure.
verification around reference checks should go up in value. Um, and so I think every recruiter on the team knows this is an issue. I mean, if you look at any recruiter who's responding to applicants on LinkedIn, right? It used to be, I think, an applicant accuracy fit for a job description used to be 12 to 15%. Now with AI and quick apply, it's like 80% of your applicants in your project folder might be perfect fits because AI has adjusted their background. So that applicant pool, the way you to go through it, you sort of have to assume that AI has adapted the background and basic due diligence becomes fundamental to the job now.
I think it also is a key component to this is not brush it under the rug and say it's never going to happen to us. Or if it does happen to us, what did we do wrong, or why did the recruiter get this candidate through the process? It's having conversations early, and that's having conversations with your hiring managers as well of saying, hey, this is a topic. This is something that I would keep looking out for, and kind of from a training purpose. But on the front end, so when you're doing an intake call, you're understanding the business, the hiring manager's needs. Bring this up as well of saying, hey, this is something that we have in place to prevent some of this, but it's not a 100% foolproof plan because individuals are very sophisticated right now. So if it does ever happen, it's not a reflection on our recruiting team. It's a reflection on the current landscape of what's actually happening, and we actually are preventing it. How would if you come up, are you having conversations, think of it like an RPO organization trying to gain new business? Are those conversations happening and are deals being won because you have some structure in place of saying this is kind of our checks and balances?
I think that yes, the conversation's coming up all the time. If the conversation isn't coming up from the client, we will actively bring the conversation up
Yeah.
as a strength, as a capability. And it's empowering your recruiters who are dealing with candidates. It's having recruiters tell candidates we're working against candidate fraud, so we require the video on. We're working to make sure our candidates and our employees are the best possible, so we require deep dives into the product work that you're presenting. We require live coding tests. Behind the scenes, you can do things like looking for IP addresses that are being used very, very consistently for video interviews from the same IP address. Like you can look for these trends. And I think empowering your recruiters to feel comfortable for them to say, I think this candidate may not be who they seem, and have another candidate double check and do a second round interview with a candidate and flagging these characteristics. So having the internal team talk about this like a real issue instead of a candidate feeling like, I'm not sure, I don't want to say this. Like it's making it a real component of a recruiter's responsibility to flag these issues and giving them the power to be able to make that judgment call.
And I think you're right on the empowerment, because sometimes as a recruiter, you don't want to bring it up because you don't want to miss the opportunity to get a hire. right? And fill that rec. So you're like, I don't want to put, bad things in the hiring manager's mind before they have that conversation. I don't want to do that. I want to make sure I fill the role. But if you are empowered to be, somebody that has that spidey sense of, hey, this is what's going on. I can't make that judgment call, but this is some things that we're seeing in trends on the specific candidate. Dig deeper. I think that's critical to the process.
Yeah, I think the not comfortable mentioning it was a valid reason for the last 20 years, maybe 25 years. But I think today it's different. The landscape's changed. It's empowering those recruiters to specifically look for this is important.
You mentioned that you had maybe a recent interview the last couple of weeks. This is real time, real candidates. Like help the audience understand the context of what you went through, and kind of what are those some spidey sense that really popped up.
So this was a candidate that I interviewed for a software engineering job maybe 3.5, 4 weeks ago, and the resume said Syracuse University. So it's a great school. So before the call, I just took a quick look at Syracuse University, looked at some of the requirements, but also looked at the map of the university, and then asked the candidate, okay, what hall of residence were you in? What part of the campus were you in? When you went into the front gate, I can't remember. Do you take a right to that hall or to the left? Like just friendly digging in, but just making sure that that was truthful. Of course, they couldn't answer any of those questions. They'd probably never been anywhere near Syracuse University. So it was a sort of a fairly easy way to flag whether someone is credible or not. And you
For
can
sure.
use these examples for almost everything. But it's
For sure.
it's a innocuous way. It just requires a little bit of research beforehand. But I don't think I'll ever forget that one. I mean, because Syracuse is a great university. Um, Mentioning something on the background where they've never been close to the campus is an easy catch.
For sure. So it's going back to the training, the interview. What type of interview questions are we asking as a recruiting team, hiring managers, to really interview? That's what we were created to do, was to interview. Obviously, with the AI landscape, there's tools, resources to, set you up for success with information. But at the end of the day, recruiters are individuals that can understand how to interview and then how to teach your hiring managers, teams, groups to how to interview. I think there's a lack of um, teaching and how to interview in the landscape of 2026.
But it's not, I think we've talked a lot about the human aspect of recruiters' responsibility. There are some really cool tools
For
that are
sure.
out there right now, which you can arm your team to sort of catch up on this. If you think your team really isn't brilliant at picking this up, which people really aren't, because they're generally quite trusting, there are some cool tools out there I think we might want to chat about.
Which ones have you seen, talking to your companies that you work with, and just internally, like what have you seen, some highlights that you've seen in the market?
So we have clients asked us about Phenom. Um, We've had clients ask about Eightfold, Beamery. I think HireVue is building some tools in. Cross Clarify, I was just reading a lot about. That sounds very, very interesting. And then I think you guys are working on this as well, aren't you?
Yeah, we just dropped a new feature within our applicant match suite, but essentially, a lot of what we're seeing is utilizing technology and having hidden invisible tech detection. Essentially, if a candidate applies, they put, white um, text within their resume, is saying, "Hey, here's a prompt of saying, hey, make me one of the best candidates for this role," or something to those effects. So it has that hidden invisible tech detection. Or just conflicting information within the resume. At any point, it's just giving them the resources of saying, hey, it's not making a decision or anything. It's just, hey, here's the spidey sense. Maybe you should dig a little bit deeper into this in the interview, ask them those right questions, sometimes the clarification on a resume, to empower the recruiters to actually interview the way they were, trained. What I'll do is I'll throw hireEZ.com in there. If you're interested, go take a look at it. There's cool features that are rolling the last couple weeks, but we would love to open it up to have any questions for the next couple minutes and hear from you guys, the users. Are you handling this in different ways? What are you feeling about it? And want to just take some questions if you guys have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you both. Fantastic discussion. Matt, great insight. I learned a lot and I was passionate about having this topic through the association. We learned about why even bother to look into fraud detection, to understanding the different definitions. Matt had five ranked by the level of risk, and Dan shared AI-enabled interview as a type of fraud. We also we have a lot of actionable insight to create a playbook for recruiting teams to handling working with fraudulent applicants. And Dan, excellent job. You do host a podcast, don't you?
We do. I mean, we do podcasts, we do events, anything and everything. So if you're interested in get involved, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. One of the bigger events that we're doing is next month, February 19th. It's called For Recruiters by Recruiters, where we're bringing together industry experts and talking about recruitment marketing, how you're pivoting, what employer brand does to an organization in 2026. Hosted by hireEZ, but hireEZ isn't there to sell anything. It's just bringing in partners, people from Workday, head of HPE, recruitment marketing, all these individuals that are just talking of what their experiences are from their organizations. So take a look at that. But again, would love to have conversations with people here if they want to explore more.
Thank you. And that worked well as a plugin for hireEZ. Thank you for sharing that. That was meant as a compliment for you, Dan. I was going to offer you to host future webinars for the RPOA.
For sure.
Excellent job.
Always.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both. I think what I thought was fascinating is a lot of what I've heard today comes to the recruiter level, where the recruiter is actually helping detect the applicant fraud. And I didn't feel we talked as much about technology in the process. So I thought that was interesting. And I don't know if it was because of the type of hire, or would technology be more applicable for high volume
Sure.
screening?
What I'll answer is technology helps and enables the recruiters. It's not going to do the job of saying, hey, that person's fraud, that person's not, because at the end of the day, it's not 100% verification, right? But it's going to give you the empowerment to, hey, here's all the resources, here's all the data. Let me do my job as a human to ask the right questions and get a head start on that. But
Mm.
Matt, what's your thoughts on that?
So I think technology is not ubiquitous across hiring. So different companies have different applicant tracking systems, have different users of sourcing tools. Some use AI, some don't use AI. So that's why technology is important, but it's not the most important thing. Human interaction and that human decision matrix, I think, is ubiquitous across hiring. So
Yeah.
that's why we lent into slightly more human stuff. There is amazing work being done. Like we have clients use AI avatars for interviews. Those are sort of fascinating to look for pauses in answering, sort of those insights around human language, which are particularly good. But generally, hiring is still very much a human to human process.
Yeah, a surprise. Yeah. Luckily, it is as it should be. All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you both. Matt, you won the bet. You said we're going to be longer than 30 minutes.
7 minutes.
Love it.
Thank you both. This has been very informative. I really appreciate your insights. Thank you both, Matt Corbett, President with ZRG, and Dan with hireEZ. Thank you all for joining us. I look forward to seeing you on a future RPOA event. Take care,
Thanks, guys.
everyone.